Hello and welcome to the Microbiome Medics podcast. I'm Dr. Siobhan McCormack.
And I'm Dr. Sheena Fraser, and we're your co-hosts.
We are both GPs and lifestyle medics with a shared passion for microbiome science. And we have spent the last 5 years deep diving into the world of the gut microbiome. We'll be translating the evidence and packaging it into actionable, bite-sized chunks so that you can harness the power of the microbiome to improve your own health and that of your patients.
Just before we start this interview, we'd like to remind our listeners to take a look at the Gut Microbiome for Clinicians course. It's available through bslm.org.uk. It's a comprehensive course on the gut microbiome which takes you from the basics to the clinical application of this fascinating new area of medicine. This course will empower you to use microbiome science in your daily practice. Hello and welcome to another Microbiome Medics podcast. Today, I'm going to be interviewing a really interesting filmmaker called Toni Harman. She's a producer of an award-winning documentary called MicroBirth, and she's really interested in the origins of the human microbiome. MicroBirth has won a top prize at several science film festivals, and it's had over 1,000 public screenings and been broadcast internationally. She's also the co-author of books The Microbiome Effect and Your Baby's Microbiome. But I'm not going to say much more. I'm going to let Toni give you her history and where she's come from and where she's going to with all of this. So Toni, hi.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me as a guest. And I think what you're doing is fantastic, and I love sharing my knowledge of the microbiome with as many people as possible. Because once you get it, it kind of unleashes this powerful wave of knowledge that kind of changes how you see everything in the world.
It does, doesn't it? It's really interesting. And I love just being with fellow microbiome nerds on this podcast because I could just chat to people like you, Toni, for hours. So I think let's give the listeners a little bit of your history. Let's go back in time and tell me when you first got an interest in microbiomes and why.
Okay, so there's a it started, as many people, is interested in microbiome. So I was a filmmaker, and we just finished our first feature film, a thriller, and we just got a deal with a Hollywood studio, and we thought we were on our way to Hollywood. And then when I say we, it's myself and my partner Alex, and then I discovered I was pregnant, which was fantastic and wonderful and brilliant, but kind of took us on a different journey. And as a filmmaker, one of the things that you do is to really, really prepare yourself. You prepare yourself for every eventuality. And that's the approach I took to this pregnancy. I read every book, saw every film, every video, and I took 2 different antenatal classes and a separate breastfeeding class to fully prepare myself for the birth. And I wrote a really simple birth plan. I wanted to, if possible, to have a home birth supported by a midwife and to exclusively breastfeed. So it wasn't really complex. I just wanted to have a vaginal birth and breastfeed. And as sometimes happens, as often happens, I ended up with an emergency C-section. And then within about an hour of my baby being born, when she was presented to me, like wrapped up tightly in a towel, a white fluffy towel, so I couldn't actually get to her. And then so there was no support for skin to skin, no support for breastfeeding. And then within an hour of my baby being born, someone came into the room. I don't know who it was. They didn't introduce themselves, and said, "Your baby needs to feed. Here's a cup of infant formula." And so even though I wanted to exclusively breastfeed, there was no support. So I ended up mixed feeding, so breastfeeding, but then topping up with infant formula. And my milk supply never really got established, and I just had problems breastfeeding from that point on. And it's a very, very common story. But that whole experience from kind of preparing for a vaginal birth and ending up having an emergency C-section, and then not having support for breastfeeding, it kind of triggered something in my brain, and I kind of started thinking kind of what what happened there then, and what are the consequences, and what does it actually matter how a baby's born and how a baby's fed? So we started, myself and my partner Alex, we started thinking about childbirth and thinking about documentary, that we thought there must be a documentary in here somewhere about childbirth. So then we made a couple of documentaries about childbirth, about doulas, and about kind of human rights in childbirth. And we ended up with the film about human rights in childbirth, which is a fantastic story about a midwife in Hungary who was prosecuted for supporting home births in Hungary, and someone she supported to have a home birth was denied the right to have a home birth, so she took her country to the European Court of Human Rights and won this kind of big appeal. Anyway, the screenings, we set up screenings around the world. So we had over 1,000 screenings, all happening on the same day of this film, Freedom for Birth, and it was great. We had newspaper headlines. We gave everybody holding a screening, so community screenings held by midwives, doulas, childbirth educators. We gave everybody a screening pack and told them how to contact their local media. And so it ended up, we made worldwide headlines all in one day, all across the world. We had people marching in the streets of Buenos Aires. We had this fantastic reaction to this film. And I couldn't actually see there being another side to it. I thought every person, every woman, every expectant parent has the right to decide how and where and with whom she gives birth. That's a fundamental human right. And it turns out, and I couldn't see the other side to the story, turns out other people did see there was another side to the story. And we just got this like a torrent of abuse saying, why are you telling women to choose how and where to give birth? Anyway, so because it kind of kicked up this storm, it's like, okay, what's the science behind childbirth then? If this is the kind of politics, what's the science? And about that time, we started hearing about epigenetics, actually. So we did started exploring, just doing some sort of preparation interviews with scientists about epigenetics. And the first couple of scientists we interviewed, they said the most important most exciting thing about epigenetics is we just don't know. So to scientists, we just don't know is brilliant because that's opportunities for research. But for us as filmmakers, you can't make a film and we just don't know. It doesn't really make a great film. So then a scientist actually emailed me and said, one of the scientists we'd interviewed about epigenetics said, there's some really interesting research about the microbiome. You should look into it. Anyway, so we started looking into the research into the microbiome, and we filmed Martin Blazer from who was the director of, at the time, the director of the Human Microbiome Project, he told us all about his missing microbes theory, and then we came across a paper in an obscure physics journal by a professor called Rodney Deertit, and he had a theory about completed self, that babies born by C-section who are formula fed or receive antibiotics, their immune system, and so those babies have an issue with their immune system, and it because their microbiome doesn't complete. So, and it was just sort of sparked something in our minds. So it's like, there is a film in this. It feels like there's evidence for what could be a really important subject. So, and that's how we made MicroBirth, and lots has happened since. And so it's kind of it's kind of by accident. We were on a path to epigenetics.
Yeah.
And then realised there's much more evidence. And when we made MicroBirth, that was 10 years ago. And there's, so there was a bit of evidence then. Now there's bucket loads, there's thousands of papers all about the kind of infant microbiome, the consequences of cesarean section or formula feeding or antibiotics, the three main perturbations to the infant microbiome.
Yeah, amazing. So that's really interesting, because your initial drive for this was feeling like your experience as a patient had all of your choices taken away from you, and it wasn't so much that you were absolutely certain at that time that the vaginal birth and the mode of feeding was going to make a dramatic difference to your child's health, but you instinctively felt that that was the right way to have your birth, and introduce your child into the world. And I think a lot of women instinctively feel that way, but it is increasingly hard for your birth to go as you want it to. So see that original documentary that you made with the doulas and the birth attendants, and what were your main messages around that? Because I mean, this is a subject where a lot of people get very anxious about talking about the mode of deliveries and things, because some people feel that we shouldn't be talking about everybody having vaginal deliveries and breastfeeding, because that makes people who have C-sections or formula feeding feel terrible that they weren't able to have that. And so how did you frame that in your original documentary?
I think so. Up until the time I had my own baby, I'd never actually been to a birth before, never been present at a birth. And it was we actually made a film before that. After we gave birth, we made a film with the other parents in our antenatal group, just about our own experiences of childbirth. And everybody had a different kind of route to childbirth. And some had C-sections, some had vaginal birth, some formula fed, some breastfed. So, and it was the premiere of that film that a doula came up to me and said, "You should make a film about doulas and what they do." So, and it was only when I went to film births supported by doulas that I saw the kind of unmedicalized version of childbirth. And so it was so I filmed a whole series of beautiful, calm, fantastic home births. Actually, I also filmed some cesareans, some sort of empowered cesareans, and it just really struck me that a birth that is supported by a midwife and a doula, provided it's a low risk birth. There's not it's not a high risk. I should be clear that obstetricians and clinicians do a brilliant job, and thank goodness we have cesareans, and thank goodness we have antibiotics, and thank goodness we have formula feeding, because sometimes all three are needed, and brilliant that we have them. However, there is another side to physiological birth where a woman just gives birth and, is supported to have skin to skin and is supported to have breastfeeding, which is so beautiful and powerful. And it's kind of how we have evolved to give birth. So in terms of the messaging, I think it's like, this is not, it's not suitable for everybody, because not everybody has a low risk pregnancy. And it's just this vision that this could be possible. And sometimes it's not possible. And sometimes, cesareans it can be fantastic and empowering, particularly if you, say with a cesarean, you have the baby, delivered straight onto the mother's chest inside the operating theatre. So you have skin to skin inside the operating theatre within seconds of the baby being born. So those gentle cesarean techniques of having the cannula put in the non-dominant arm, the drape lowered at the moment of the baby being born, so the general chatter of the operating theatre reduces, so that the mum hears the baby and the baby hears the mum's voice for the first time. All of those things could be possible. So I'm not saying it's that everybody has to have a vaginal birth, but just everybody needs to have a respectful birth. And whether that is a completely physiological birth or a cesarean, it's just kind of respecting that sensitive time period when the baby is born. And then, I mean, I feel very, very, very passionate that there should be more support for every single mother to breastfeed. And I think it's not enough just to have a tick box exercise where, sure, a mum has 60 minutes of skin to skin. Well, actually, we've interviewed scientists who say actually for the wiring of the mum's brain, ideally you'd have 20 continuous hours of skin to skin to wire the mum's and the baby's brain.
Wow. So,
I mean, that might not be possible. It needs a rethinking of the whole birth process.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of messaging, it's like, let's show people what could be possible, whether it's a vaginal birth or whether it is a cesarean, and show actually there are simple things you can do that don't cost anything to make that birth really respectful and really mindful of the baby's microbiome.
Okay, so we'll come on to the baby's microbiome in a wee bit, and certainly, I think that the messaging is massively important because I think women need to not feel any guilt around the time of their delivery and when things don't go to plan, because most women that I know that wrote big birth plans like you did, they didn't go to plan, and I'm one of those. I hadn't actually written mine down per se, but I had assumed that I would have a natural delivery at the due date, and that I would breastfeed and everything. And my first baby was born prematurely, 6 weeks early. And that was a huge shock to my system because I wasn't quite prepared when my baby came along. And then, to confound that, I wasn't really supported to breastfeed either. I was just sort of thrown a breast pump because my baby couldn't breastfeed. She didn't have the strength to breastfeed because she was so premature. So she had a little nasogastric tube, and I was thrown a breast pump and just told to pump, and I had no idea what I was doing. I might be a medic, but I was absolutely useless, totally unprepared. And I felt that, there certainly could have been somebody sitting down with me and just talking me through it a little bit more kindly than I received at the time. And I'm sure my experience is not dissimilar to other people's. And the problem is, if you're not really desperate to do something like breastfeed, then, with that kind of an experience, it's really going to put you off. So, I persevered, and I'm glad I did. But I think it's really hard to plan a birth because so much can go wrong for any woman. And it's really hard. And you don't want, whatever happens, you want to know that it's going to be safe, that you're going to have people available to you to deliver this baby safely in a safe environment, and you want your own health to be protected, and you want the health of your baby to be protected. And this is why modern birthing in obstetric units has been absolutely life-saving. But it's really interesting what you were saying about doulas, and people may not have heard of doulas. So can you just explain the different systems of childbirth? Because most people will just sort of register with their maternity unit and get their midwife, and when they feel their contractions start, they will phone up the hospital and go in and have their baby in a hospital environment. Can you just explain doulas and home births and really just other options that are available to women?
Okay, so there's great question. So a doula is a non-medical professional who provides practical and emotional support to a mother. So, but doesn't do anything medical, right? So whereas a midwife is responsible for the medical side of things, for low risk births. Obviously, if there's a high risk situation, then you have your OBGYN involved, and it goes to kind of consultant level, and they make, in conjunction with the mother, and sort of decisions about the best possible care. But if you're talking about say a low risk birth, so a mother might think, okay, I've read all the literature, I've been informed, I've been to my antenatal classes, they kind of want a home birth if that was a supported option in the area. And in many cases in the UK and around the world, home birth is not a supported option. I mean, I'd love to see more, because where it is a supported option, a fully supported option in the area, it can be as safe as a hospital birth, right? So a doula would sit down with the parents beforehand, talk through the different options for birth, and then during, say, if it was a home birth, the births I've filmed, the doula would say the mum the waters might break, or she has a first contraction. The doula goes over, usually in the middle of the night, and if the mum's having a birth pool, the doula would fill the birth pool, would put warm compresses on the mum's back, would relax her, would get the music set up, would kind of calm the dad down, would then make cups of tea or do snacks. The midwife would come, the midwife would do all the medical stuff, and meanwhile the doula is just kind of holding the space of just a loveliness. And then as the birth progresses, the mum might be holding on to the doula for support, or might be holding on to the dad, or might be phoning. The doula might be taking the child to the neighbour for if there's sort of childcare issues. All of those kind of things that you kind of want an extra pair of hands to do. That's what a doula does. Mm-hmm. And then after the baby is born, the doula again make more cups of tea, or or wrap the mum in a towel or a blanket to keep the mum warm, and if the doula's trained in breastfeeding, will help initiate breastfeeding, or initiate skin to skin. And it's just a kind of a really lovely practical and emotional support. Mm-hmm. So if I was to have another baby, I would definitely have a doula, because it's just having somebody who's on your side, mm-hmm. who can kind of protect your bubble of space. Mm-hmm. And obviously, if there's an emergency situation, you can have a doula for a hospital birth. Mm-hmm. Depending, some units are a little bit funny about allowing access, only having one parent and not an additional support person. But generally, the doulas are allowed on the birthing suite in the hospital. So if a baby was being born by cesarean, then the doula might be inside the operating theatre, again facilitating skin to skin, or just supporting the dad or the partner, just mm-hmm. their presence. And in the recovery room, the doula will be there making cups of tea again, or just making sure that everything is lovely, that the mum is informed about her decisions. And I think that's for me, one of my touch buttons is that parents being informed, fully informed. Yeah. I think that it's a fundamental human right that every parent should be fully informed about their birth and their infant feeding choices. And mm-hmm. when you talk about guilt, it's a little bit of a trigger for me, because I don't think that most parents are informed about their birth and infant feeding choices. Mm-hmm. And the sense of guilt happens if you know your choices and then you make a choice, and then you feel guilty about that choice afterwards. But right now, most parents are not fully informed about their infant feeding choices. The microbiome is not mentioned. Mm. Their other aspects of their care are not discussed with the mother, and so and the father too, the partner. So the mum's basis for choices is not fully informed. So whether that's induction or reasons for a cesarean or epidurals, whatever it is, that it's not enough just to tick a box and say, oh yeah, it's fine. I've discussed the inductions and the need or not for inductions, or even sort of antibiotics, mm-hmm. the use of antibiotics. Mm-hmm. It's just this I would love for parents to be able to ask their healthcare provider or clinician, what happens if I take those antibiotics? What happens if I don't take the antibiotics? What's the plan if I take the antibiotics? It's kind of the full range of choices. I mean, it seems quite right now, parents are kind of taken down a line and they're not given choices. The choice of the healthcare provider. So it's...
Yeah. So can I go back a little tiny bit? I agree with you on the consent side, because as you say, there isn't a discussion happening about the microbiome. And actually, up until now, we haven't really mentioned the microbiome in this podcast. But obviously, we're Microbiome Medics, and that's our fundamental interest. And the reason why I've invited you on to talk about childbirth and breastfeeding is because it is integral to the development of the microbiome of the infant. And we know that can affect the infant's health as they progress through their life. Children that are born by vaginal delivery and are breastfeed are receiving the right microorganisms into their gut right from the very start. And these microorganisms are massively important to train the body's immune system. So they're less likely to get disease as they age. So it's a really important thing. And actually, any listener listening to this who wants to know a little bit more, please have a listen back, because there are a couple of podcasts we have on mode of delivery and the gut microbiome, and also on the feeding choice and the gut microbiome. So we've covered these in previous podcasts in a lot more depth, and our listeners can go back and have a wee listen, and that will tell you a lot more about why this is so important to the development of the infant gut microbiome. But I think going back to the issue of consent and that doula being in the room, I remember personally when I was having my premature delivery that I really felt that I wasn't really taking in a lot of the information that I was being given. I think it was all a bit of a blur, to be honest with you. Well, one, you're in pain. And when you're in pain, it's very hard to concentrate on anything else that anybody might be telling you. Two, it can be a frightening situation. It can be quite a shocking situation being in a hospital, being in pain, not really certain what's going to happen next. And I would say, especially for me, having a premature birth, I wasn't quite prepared for that. And I suppose emotionally it was stressful. So of course, somebody talking to me and giving me options at that stage, I'm not really taking it in. And I think, I spoke to a doula recently about this, and that was her point, that somebody has to be there to be able to translate to the mother and the father what is actually happening. And it's not just the mother that is stressed to bits and, pain. The father or the partner of the pregnant lady is also going to be under a great amount of stress as well in this situation. And so, it's lovely to have a person who can be quite objective, who's able to translate what's happening all around. And you may or may not have experience in the medical field and have an understanding of what's going on. But if you don't, it must be even more frightening. So having a doula to explain things and explain what your choices are, I think is a really, really important part of their work. And also, they're prioritizing what they think is beneficial to the mum and the baby, to make sure that, the mum is given the opportunity to birth in a position that is helpful for her. And I think that's useful because they have a lot of understanding about, different positions of birthing and, how that will impact upon your body and your baby. And, they have a lot of understanding about normal childbirth, what is normal, how to create normal childbirth. And having that understanding and that experience is very, very useful to have in the room. But you're it's important that people understand that these doulas aren't medically trained. And so aren't able to take the role of the midwife if things get complicated, or take the role of an obstetrician if things were complicated. So what do you think, Toni?
I think you've summed up the role of a doula is fantastic. I think that obviously, the best person, if you've got a high risk or a situation or any kind of pregnancy, the best person to talk to is your midwife or your OBGYN. But it is having this kind of another person listening and able to kind of pick out points and advocate for you if necessary. But actually, I just believe that it's parents themselves who need to be given an understanding of their choices. And it's like sometimes when you I understand what you're saying about kind of when you're in pain, you can't really take people in. I've had a couple of operations, and kind of when you come round from an operation, and the doctor is explaining to you kind of the follow-up strategies. Literally 5 minutes later, you've got no idea what they said to you.
Yeah.
And it's and it's not, it's just that they've done a brilliant job and it's fantastic. But it's that kind of, ideally, all those conversations and those options should be discussed way earlier in pregnancy. Mm-hmm. And just, to have an informed discussion about, I know there's pressures on the healthcare system, and, midwives are brilliant, and obstetricians are fantastic. Everyone works really, really hard. Mm-hmm. And I just would love for more time and more resources to go into this period.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
To support choice, and to make those choices meaningful, and so that people understand what the choices mean. Yeah, and I would just love more support for. However, you never know how a birth's going to go, right? So you're never going to know if a birth is going to go smoothly in a vaginal birth, or whether it's going to be a C-section. You just don't know the consequences. But if there was just more support for skin to skin and more support for breastfeeding, however a baby is born, that's the best possible thing for the infant microbiome. And so that's kind of where my passion is. So doulas are fantastic, midwives are fantastic, obstetricians are fantastic. But it's just that kind of initial thing.
Yeah. So let's move on then, because then your interest was focused on the microbiome and the infant microbiome, and the importance of that. And this moves on to your documentary, MicroBirth. So talk me through what happened with that documentary. Who did you interview? What did you say? What were the main messages of your MicroBirth documentary, and what were you trying to change at that time?
So MicroBirth featured 11 different professors across different fields. So we had obstetricians, we had microbiologists, we had immunologists, and the key messages were that this really sensitive time period surrounding, pregnancy, birth, and those first few weeks and first few months is a really critical time period for establishing the infant gut microbiome. And perturbations like C-section or antibiotics or formula feeding, they, as you said yourself, they disrupt the optimal training of the infant immune system, which can lead to increased risk for allergies, asthma, obesity, diabetes, all those lots of immune-related conditions. So that's the key message, really, that we need to pay attention to this sensitive time period and to really look at what we're doing within that time period, and look at the practices, these common practices that up until that point hadn't been looked at through the lens of the microbiome. So we made the film, and we used the same distribution model as we had for Freedom for Birth. So our previous film about the human rights in childbirth. So we set up screenings with we had 1,000 different screenings across the world happening on the same day, And each of those screenings was held by our network of midwives, doulas, childbirth educators, lactation consultants. And they held these community screenings, and it was great. We had this fantastic wave of screenings, and again, the film was featured on different TV stations, and we made newspaper headlines everywhere. And in fact, I was in Holland a couple of years ago, and I was talking to I was interviewing a professor, and he said, "Your film, it prompted a 2-hour debate on Dutch TV about microbirth and what we should do about microbirth."
Brilliant. What year was this, Toni?
Oh, it was released in 2014. Right. So that was 10 years ago.
10 years ago. Wow.
Well, we had, so it's won various science film festivals, and one of the film festivals was in Prague. And so we screened the film, and one of the obstetricians, the biggest obstetrician in the Czech Republic, stood up and said, This film shows we have to change. We have to change our protocols. We have to change our procedures. And he asked the medical community that were present, what are we going to do? And 10 years later, nothing has changed.
Yeah. And so, I mean, that's incredible. You got a lot of attention from the media. You were out there in the newspapers. You were screening all over the place. And yet people were obviously interested. But what do you think were the stumbling blocks for people to take this on board in 2014?
I think at the time there was research published, and but there wasn't a body of research. Now there's a body of research, and I think that there's this off-cited statistic that it can take up to 17 years from a paper being published for that information to be adopted into clinical practice. So I think there is a kind of a delay between research being published and clinical practice. But I also think that, thinking about the microbiome, and you know this, that thinking about the microbiome does mean a whole new way of thinking. And it involves putting the microbiome first, so to speak. Yeah. And that takes a whole, that's going to take a while for everybody to get their heads around this, for us to rethink obstetric procedures or breastfeeding support procedures. Yeah. Because people just, even now, we've been banging on about this for 10 years. We've got 43,000 people in our online school. We've done conferences, we've written books, I've done loads of media interviews. Yeah. And still a percentage of the population haven't heard of the microbiome. A percentage of doctors might have heard about the microbiome, but might not know what to do with this information. So I think there's just this gap between kind of what the scientists know and what the clinicians do. And my hope is that gap closes, and that we can, for the microbiome to be taught in medical schools, for there to be clinical protocols that support the microbiome, particularly over this sensitive time period around birth in the first few weeks. Yeah. And it's not rocket science, and it's not expensive things. So however birth goes, it's being respectful of the microbiome. So that skin to skin and exclusive breastfeeding. Yeah. Number one, and number two for every single birth. Okay. And I should probably let people know how we met, because we were at a recent meeting put on by the Royal Society, a small sort of think tank type meeting, whereby some really prominent microbiome scientists and people like Toni and me and some really interesting people who are also involved in politics and just, really interested parties in microbiome science gathered together, really just to think around how we get microbiome science out into the mainstream now, because the science has built so much. There is so much evidence now for the importance of human microbiomes, and that we should be considering this in
in our sort of mainstream medicine and our mainstream surgery and just day-to-day healthy living, we should be considering our microbiomes. So there's definitely a lot of interest at the moment in trying to get this into curriculums, into mainstream medicine practice. But like you say, Toni, my experience so far is that the vast majority of my colleagues don't have the knowledge, don't have the interest in microbiome science. And I know for a fact that my patients who are having babies and going into my local obstetric unit are not being counselled on the importance of their gut microbiome and having a healthy gut microbiome throughout their pregnancy, and also the importance to their infant of developing a healthy microbiome through their mode of delivery and their feeding choice. And so that's not something that is part of the narrative at the moment. And I've given talks to my local obstetric unit, and I've even met with my local feeding coordinators as well on this subject. But we seem to have a long way to go, certainly in Scotland. So I feel for you. 10 years you've been on at this, and we're still not there yet, Toni. This is a bit hard to hear, really, for me as well, just starting this journey.
It's there's hope, okay, and the fact that more people know about the microbiome, so there's more interest in the microbiome. So when we started, people literally, my family members thought I was nuts. I had no idea why I was talking about bacteria, why I was interested in it. And no one had really heard of the microbiome back then, in 2014. Now people have heard of the microbiome, and I think there's things which have kind of tripped us up in a way, where things like people associate the microbiome with gut health, and that's fantastic. And yes, it's those messages about eating healthily, fantastic, brilliant, wonderful. But there does seem to be some messages have been co-opted by commercial companies, where it's like, it's okay, you just need a probiotic to fix it. And I think I'd love to just see this message of, okay, let's just get it right at the beginning with birth, and let's all be aware of the microbiome and make choices that are microbiome mindful. And so whether that's eating more fibre, or eating a rainbow of vegetables, or doing more exercise, or just being aware that it's not just you, it's your trillions of microbes living on and in you, and being mindful of that. And so that's kind of the curtains starting to lift up. But I think and there's hope, and there's a rainbow through the curtain that we can see, but there's maybe a glass between us and the rainbow.
Still a little barrier there. Okay, great. So with that in mind, though, Toni, how do you see us being able to integrate microbiome science into the journey of the patient woman, the patient who's going to go through obstetrics now? They get pregnant, they phone up their local birthing unit, they book their first appointment. How do you see an education into microbiome science being delivered to that patient from the start and all the way through?
I would love it. So we're there is a gap right now between kind of what, so all the research on the microbiome and the kind of that information reaching parents. So we've created a antenatal class that's microbiome focused. So we're testing that at the moment. We've got 109 people around the world kind of holding our classes to introduce expectant parents to the idea of the microbiome early in pregnancy, so they can be informed about their choices. And I think, so that's part one. Part two is educating the health professionals. So we've got our school, which we've got 43,000 health professionals being educated about the microbiome. Same as you're educating the health professionals about the microbiome, so that there's a kind of a knowledge and an awareness of the microbiome. We've got a new film coming out next year, so 2025, which is aimed at expectant parents. So to bring the knowledge of the microbiome to expectant parents, not in a judgmental way, but just this is really exciting, and this is what you can do to optimize your own gut health, but also to optimize your baby's trajectory of health. And it's really, really simple. It's just like, just be aware. And it's kind of, but with jeopardy that there is this narrow window to optimize your baby's gut, and there's only one chance to do it. So it's just awareness of that. And then our idea is that if we can, so 10 years ago, we had 1,000 screenings of MicroBirth. We'd love to have 10,000 screenings of MicroBirth happening all around the world over the next year. And to really, so for those screenings to be held in communities by, say, midwives, doulas, childbirth educators, or doctors, or anybody kind of microbiome geeks like me who are kind of really into the science, you can hold a screening. And for those screenings to invite expectant parents to go along to the screening, to start engaging. So expectant or new parents, and to learn about this amazing science, and to think about, what we can do, and to maybe bring in experts like local microbiologists talking about the science and talking about kind of what you can do in your day-to-day life. And if we can have, 10,000 screenings, supported by, we've got a directory of health professionals who are microbiome aware. That's part of the MicroBirth plan. And it's just this kind of, okay, let's start bringing this information out there and bringing this to parents. And at some point, these parents will ask their health professional about the microbiome. And hopefully that health professional should be aware of the microbiome and should be aware of the latest research about, support for skin, support for breastfeeding. And so we just, change happens at the top, and there's people working at the top, working with politicians and hospital managers and insurance companies. So those conversations are happening at the top, but also we're kind of, we're empowering parents with fully informed choice about the microbiome. And it's not me telling anyone what to do. It's just like, this is what this amazing science is saying. And these are the things you can do, but what you do is up to you. Yeah. So, and it's all based on research, evidence-based research. And for me, it's just about empowering choice, and to empower those conversations with health professionals, whether that's your midwife when you first book in, or with an obstetrician later on in the journey. It's just for parents to understand that they need to factor in the microbiome in their choices, and those discussions need to incorporate the microbiome. Yeah. So it's kind of I'm seeing a 10-year trajectory where we can start doing this and start making change happen. So it's not going to happen overnight. As much as I want to reach a tipping point where everyone's talking about this and change happens really quickly, I think realistically it's going to take a while to set, clinical protocols. It's going to take a while for the medical curriculum to change. It's going to take a while for hospital policies to change. But I think I think there's such overwhelming evidence for incorporating the microbiome into clinical practice that the world will change.
Great. So that's really exciting about your forthcoming documentary. And if somebody wanted to hold a screening, how would they go about doing that?
We haven't announced how they're going to hold a screening, but we've either go to microbirth.com or the microbirthplan.com. So the MicroBirth plan is our directory of kind of healthcare professions, which we're just setting up. And just just email us and be on our list. And as soon as we announce the film and how to set up a screening. So it's quite it kind of, now we've done it twice. We've done this kind of global premiere screening protocol twice, and it's been fantastic. but now our reach is bigger, and it's going to take a bit more thought and kind of mindfulness and of how to get people setting up screenings and the questions they're going to be asked at the screenings, because we'd love to have panels at each of the screenings. But I'd love everybody listening to hold a screening and just like kind of come on board and like, let's just do this together. I think it's just this powerful, once you get the microbiome, once you kind of understand the power, it's like, we can transform potentially the trajectory of health for the next generation, and it's just simple things.
And actually, I'm well situated to hold a screening. Being a GP, I have I have patients who are going through maternity care at the moment. So, it wouldn't be so difficult for me to hold a screening in my surgery for anybody who was really interested to find out about this. So I think I will be contacting you to get on board with that, Toni. It's right up my street, and it's a big passion of mine as well. Sadly, at the moment, when patients are discovering they're pregnant and booking in with their maternity care, I don't normally see them. If you have a normal pregnancy, you don't really have to encounter your GP in that process, because people can self-refer now to the maternity hospital. So although I have an interest in microbiome science and I have the knowledge to pass on to patients, I rarely have the opportunity to do that because patients bypass me. And the first time I see them is when they come in for their 6-week check. And by this stage, the baby's 6 weeks old, they may have even stopped breastfeeding by the time they see me, or if they'd have done it at all. And I'm seeing more children these days being discharged from hospital on dual feeding regimes, which seem to be very popular in my maternity unit. And unfortunately, that tends to really introduce a decline in maternal breast milk production and a decline in breastfeeding. So I see breastfeeding not being as successful with dual feeding, which I've been concerned about. That's just purely an observation from my own patients. So yeah, I think that would be really interesting to have a screening and to think about how we can empower women to make the choices that suit them, but also have the confidence to be able to say how they feel about birthing choices, and also to understand the impact of that these birthing choices make going forward. So that's going to be 2025. Have you got a sort of date for 2025 when you think that's going to be?
Spring 2025. So
okay.
Not until we announce it. So we haven't told anyone the title. We haven't told anybody so it's kind of So once we announce it, then we're a countdown to launch. So
so watch this space at the moment, but get ready for it. And what can people do in the meantime? If you're empowered by this conversation and you want to get involved or learn more, if you're a health professional, even a non-health professional, or somebody who is considering a pregnancy, even what can you do to get more information and help in this process?
So we've set up our directory of the microbirthplan.com. So it's our global directory of healthcare professionals who are microbiome mindful. You can so join the directory. You can take our courses. We've got kind of online courses. We've got free offerings. We've got loads of information out there. You can go to if you want to contact me. You can either go via our social media, which are MicroBirth Movie or Microbiome Courses, and just start a conversation and just to kind of get involved, really. And I love the idea. Wouldn't it be fantastic if every GP surgery held a screening of our film, or just or had a little clinic, ran a little clinic about the microbiome early in pregnancy, early enough, or even preconception. So that people can start eating kind of, more fiber, a more diverse range of fruit and vegetables in order to optimize their gut microbiome before they give birth. I can imagine like a little clinic, a little fun kind of get together in every GP surgery of kind of expectant parents, like early in pregnancy, where they talk about what they can do for their microbiome. That's where I'm seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're absolutely spot on. If you are pregnant, the state of your microbiome really matters, because one, that's going to be the microbiome you pass on to your infant when you have your vaginal delivery, if you have one. But secondly, in order to be healthy and fit throughout your pregnancy and to reduce your chances of disease, infections, complications, looking after your own gut microbiome can be so, so important. And yet, I don't think a lot of mothers are at all aware that can make a difference to them. I spoke to a pregnant patient of mine once who had just been diagnosed with gestational diabetes, and that's diabetes in pregnancy. And diabetes in pregnancy puts you at more risk because your infant can grow larger, and then you can have more difficulties during the birthing process just because of the size of the infant, and so that might cause you problems with the vaginal delivery. But you're also more prone to other complications like preeclampsia, which is a high blood pressure in pregnancy, and infections and a whole host of different things. And the infant is more likely to develop diabetes as they grow older and have obesity issues and various things, because they inherit that microbiome of the mother, which is an altered microbiome because of the gestational diabetes. And actually, I explained all of this to my patient with gestational diabetes, and it was news to her. She thought, I've just got a bit of gestational diabetes. I just need to take my medication and then I'll be fine. But it wasn't really explained to her that taking the medication didn't actually reverse the diabetes. It treated the sugar levels and brought them down a little, but it didn't reverse the process that caused the diabetes, and it certainly didn't eradicate the diabetes, and it didn't eradicate the issues in the gut. So I explained this to her, and I explained that a diet that would enhance her gut microbiome would also help her to reverse this diabetes, so that we could, put her in a better state at the end of her pregnancy to pass a better gut microbiome onto her infant. And I saw her for her 6-week check, which was about 3 months down the line. And she had reversed her diabetes with diet, so much so that she brought her weight down radically as well. She had an uncomplicated birth, and she was breastfeeding. And she thanked me for the knowledge, because she was then able to educate her family as well. And she managed to change the diets of everybody in her family. And she was super healthy, super fit, and she looked amazing. And I was absolutely delighted. But that's just one example of somebody who, hadn't been given any sort of education, so wasn't able to make an informed decision. And I think, we could all impact even individual patients in that way. Or, we can do it on hopefully a grander scale with your documentary.
I love that. I love that you've kind of empowered someone just with their knowledge about their diet, and it's kind of I feel for someone who's pregnant right now, because the advice for kind of how to eat healthy or be healthy is pretty slim on the ground. It's just kind of like, okay, avoid these types of foods, avoid caffeine, avoid alcohol, and it's kind of, it just needs to be, a whole different conversation, but just nutritional training or resources just to help support parents. I mean, that's what I'd love, is just more support for parents and their choices. And I think that's brilliant. I think that's such a powerful thing to reverse diabetes and to optimize their gut microbiome before the birth. I think, wow, whatever you do, that should be kind of put out to every pregnant person?
Yeah, I think so. I think it needs to be, there just needs to be more education. There just needs to be more awareness. And we should be trying to reverse gestational diabetes when somebody develops it, not just treat it. And yeah, I mean, these are the sort of conversations that I'm hoping will happen more. So I think we've still got a wee way to go with this. But I'm delighted that you're making headway with this, because as a lone GP trying to send the message, I find it's really exciting for me that you're out there and you're doing something on a much grander scale than I could ever achieve. And you're going to reach so many people. And that's exciting for me, Toni.
Well, thank you. I think it's a case of we're all holding hands together. So we've filmed maybe about 100 different scientists in different fields in the last 10 years, and but it is kind of, we're holding hands with the scientists, we're holding hands with the health professionals, with the doulas, the midwives, lactation consultants, with medics, those kind of aware medics, with you, with your kind of listeners. I think we're all holding hands together, and together we can make a difference. And I think, I feel real hope for the future.
Great. Fantastic. Well, I think on that, Toni, I'm really excited about what you're doing. I'm delighted you came on the podcast to tell everybody about it. I think this is really, really important. It's important messaging. There's so much we can do to really enhance the microbiome of our next generation that are coming down the line. And I think, we've got this opportunity now with your resources and with your help to get this education out to more people. So thanks again. Thanks for coming on. And I really look forward to seeing this documentary. Thanks, Toni.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Microbiome Medics podcast. We really hope you enjoyed the content and we welcome your feedback. We'd love to hear any suggestions you might have for microbiome topics that you'd like us to cover. And we also appreciate listeners' questions and will endeavour to answer them in the next podcast.